Hey everybody, welcome back to JNJtabletop. Today I'm really excited. Everybody just get your paladins, get ready to giddy on up because we're going to be talking about seahorses, unicorns, griffins, and all sorts of other crazy things to ride because we are reviewing and discussing Explorer's Guide to Wild Mounts. I'm
Oh,
really excited.
Josh,
What?
it's Wildemount. I mean, like there are mount. There actually is a mount in here, but it's campaign setting.
So it's not like a supplement of like beasts you could tame and ride.
I mean, that would be cool, but that's not. That's not this.
Oh shoot. Everybody, welcome back for real, J&J Tabletop. I am Josh. With me, as always, is Jake. And you probably also know that right underneath, it says my name. Right underneath over there, it says his name. Whoa. So we don't forget, because sometimes we get confused. But today, we are talking about Explorer's Guide to Wildemount.
Yes.
If you guys have played, or if you have watched our Sunday game, Ancient Relics and Hokey Religions, then you've seen a little bit about Wildemount. Wildemount is the Critical Role campaign setting. Specifically, it's a continent in...
Exandria.
Oh, it's a continent in Exandria.
Oh my
Um,
god.
that's that's basically the campaign setting that Matthew Mercer created for his game and for Critical Role. And yeah, no, it's there's a lot of fun stuff in here, and I think we're just gonna dive into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So this book starts off with the Welcome to Wildemount section, and this pretty much has everything that you'd expect it to have in it. It's all of those like, hey, what is this? This is a new thing for D&D, and it tells you all that stuff. One super exciting thing, and I could be wrong about this, but this is the first new official D&D campaign setting since um the one,
Eberron.
yeah, Ever.
Yes.
See, you all think that we're doing like funny intros when we did that last one before, but that's because I can never remember names, especially
Yeah.
names pertaining to wild mounts.
Yeah, no, we're legitimately incompetent. It's not an
Mhm.
act.
Was there anything that stood out to the Welcome to Wildemount section for you?
I think it does a good job of just kind of going over some of the things there, like the important things in Wildemount, like the nations. You have the Empire, you have the Kryn Dynasty, which I know that gets into factions a little later in the book. So you have that. You got that war is brewing. I know the setting really revolves around that. Critical Role kind of starts off where it's more of like a Cold War in a sense, and like you have a little more political intrigue between those two nations. I like that they have a calendar and time section.
No,
Good.
10 days.
There's 7 days in a week, people. We don't need to make this too confusing. Thank you, Matthew
Fantastic.
Mercer. If you
Thank
ever watch this video, just thank you.
Yeah, we
That's all I have
appreciate
to
you.
say about that.
And nice, it gives you like a little like a daily life section too that tries to tell you just
Mm.
about the currency and the languages and the technology that exists there, and that's kind of cool to have. It's definitely good information to know. Most of it's pretty standard, but it's still good to have it there.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything in this section that really like stands out. Like, oh my gosh, this is groundbreaking. I think it's just good.
Mhm.
It just does the job. And sometimes that's all you need.
Sometimes that is all you need. The next section is actually where it starts to get interesting for me, and that's like the official chapter one. It's not like the intro. It's like here's the
Mm-hmm.
story of Wildemount, and the chapter is called the story of Wildemount, and that's where it goes through the history. And I think Wildemount does have a very interesting history where you just have the way that like the gods were involved, and then suddenly there's these other things that they have to fight, and then the betrayer gods and all that stuff, and it just there's a lot of interesting things there, and it's all recent. I found that really nice.
Yeah, I agree. If you have a situation, or if you have history where there are deities warring with each other, extraplanar beings taking sides, like crazy powerful wizards and mages and stuff like that, you all of a sudden now have just a beautiful canvas that you can just sprinkle in anything you want. You want to have some crazy artifacts to find. Hey, maybe that sounds a little bit like a game we're running right now, but you have some options for it. The sky's the limit as far as what you want to do. And, this is a high fantasy setting. And I think that this facilitates telling that kind of a story really well.
I think that it's cool when you think about like just the fact that there are gods on the earth at war with each other, not currently, but there were at one point, is a cool thing. But the fact that it mattered as much as it did, like if you look at the map of Wildemount, and I guess we might get a little more into this later, I don't know. But if you look at the map of Wildemount, the landscape is changed because of the war, because of the calamity, because of this war between these gods. It told there's now a wasteland in this countryside, and it's because of the war with the gods. Like it wasn't just something that happened that people talk about. It is now a part of people's everyday lives. They're living with the consequences of it. And I think you've if you've watched our other videos, you've heard us talk about this before. Like consequences make the game like real. So the fact that gods fought in this plane and that has an effect on your life makes the setting real. So I love that.
I love that too. And one of my favorite things about the history of Wildemount, and it's really Exandria as a whole, is the prime gods and the betrayer gods fighting each other. The result of that was it was so destructive on the land that the prime deities decided to make sure that they couldn't interfere in the material plane at that level again. So every single god is now locked behind what's called the divine gate, which just adds another thing that doesn't affect magic. Like if you're a cleric or a paladin, you still have full access to your spells, but it does add this like even just more emphasis on like, don't look for these gods to bail you out. Like you made this mess, now it's yours. Like it's just the way it is. And I really like that for telling stories and player agency.
Then when we get into the Wildemount after the Calamity section, that is almost like the factions and Gazetteer, like light, if you will, because it breaks down all the regions and it gives you kind of like a brief history of those regions before and after the Calamity. And the Calamity is, of course, after the War of the Gods and after the Divine Gate was brought down. And I thought that was good. It's like a nice. It's only like a paragraph or two on each place, which makes it really easy to consume and know a lot of history about the region just by spending like 10 or 15 minutes just in that one section.
I found myself like when I was preparing for our game on Ancient Relics and Hoki Religions, I was just naturally drawn to the story of Malasmir or Malayasmir, however you're supposed to pronounce that. That's also a thing. We don't know how to pronounce everything. But I was naturally drawn there. I love the story of elves kind of being refugees and having to find their home elsewhere. And I love the city of Uthadern and the fact that the dwarves took them in. So I naturally wanted to play someone that was there. I mean, just the mystery of Malasmir is something that I really wanted to explore, and I was excited that it fit with, or either you fit it to what I wanted to do, or it naturally just kind of lined in. I don't know whether maybe it was destiny. I don't know.
Based on my area of expertise of Ivlar, we'll say, that I saw that and I was like, okay, yeah, this is right up my alley. That's why we went with that. But yeah, I'm glad it was what you were interested in though, because that definitely makes things easier.
And to your point before, like each thing feels like it's a small enough nugget that you can just kind of, take 10 minutes to read a section. You do it. I remember just, I pulled up D&D Beyond on my phone, started reading it. I was like, oh, this is cool. I was like, oh, I wonder what this is. And I would look over here and it just like, you could kind of It felt like each section kind of had, or each chapter kind of had a way of going about researching how the historical events and the story of Wildemount would relate to that region and how it was affected. So it kind of all ties together, I think, pretty good or pretty well.
Yeah,
I did like that.
I think so too. And after we get through that, then it kind of gives us like just a list of the gods and kind of your standard D&D type thing where there's just like a ton of gods and they all have all their things that they do. And there's probably a little bit of overlap, not as much, not nearly as much overlap as there is in the Forgotten Realms, but there's a good amount of prime deities, betrayer gods, lesser idols, all sorts of stuff in there, and lots of things you could use in your campaigns.
Yeah, I like that he definitely dialed down the sheer number of gods that there are in Forgotten Realms. I look at a Forgotten Realms chart and I'm just like, okay, what alignment am I? What race am I? Because they all have like 50 gods. So like that's here. It kind of is a little bit more 4E in that they just kind of is like these are generally the gods that you could find in your game and enjoy.
I think he used some gods from 4E as well in this, which is kind of interesting. Just not like necessarily good or bad. It's just I guess it is kind of cool to see. Just he was a fan of the game, or I guess around that time, and then decided to just drop that in there.
Yeah,
Cool.
I think he started playing as a early teenager. I want to say so. There's some of the D&D stuff that he's used to is like second edition and stuff like that that I when I cut my teeth on.
So that brings us to the next chapter, chapter 2, which is factions and societies. This one I thought was pretty good. This is where like they'll start to go into detail about what organization or society exists in this world, what their goals are, any ties that they might have, some figures of interest for their the leadership maybe. And I thought that was nice. I think for some things it might have been cool to put in like NPC stat blocks or like suggestions for like use commoner for this person or like whatever, something like that. I think could have been cool, especially for the Clovis Concord, um, which is like the no, that's the Cerberus Assembly. Cerberus Assembly, whichever one is the mages.
That would
You
be the
know,
Cerebus assembly.
yeah. But I thought it was well done. I thought there's a lot of good information in here.
I agree. I think you have. I think factions outside of and inside of nations make interesting storytelling elements with political intrigue. In our game, like at the time of this recording, we're headed towards Melasmere, and just from this alone, I could see. I think I was talking to you the other day about it, and I was like, I could see there being like 5 different parties showing up somewhat at the same time and having a different agenda and goal for what's going on there, which could have some really cool player options. Maybe we decide to side with one of them. Maybe we don't want to decide with any of them. Whatever it is, I feel like the tribes of Shady Creek Run, there could be 2 of those families could show up. I could see the Glass Blades from Uthadern showing up. We're about to have dinner with the Tabaxi. Who knows what's going to happen there? But maybe they're interested in what happened at Melasmere. I don't know. And I just think that if you know the goals of each of them, it gives you a lot of tools as a DM to try and set up your own Wildemount adventure and story.
Yeah, that's I totally agree with that. One of the most important things you have to do as a DM, in my opinion, is determining what factions, what players, whether it's villains or adversaries or just factions and political figures, like which are the important ones in the area and what their goals are. Because if you know what their goals are, then you know what they're going to be doing and like how they're going to react to certain things. So when your players throw like a curveball at you, you at least have some sort of idea of how people would react to things or certain things that are important to them, so that you're not totally thrown. So the fact that it has goals for pretty much every important group in the nation, is huge. It's very good.
Yeah, I think that just helps a DM prepare the sandbox really well. right? Because
Exactly.
like you said, curveballs come, and if you can hit the curveball by knowing your sandbox,
Yep. Our next chapter is the Gazetteer. Gazetteer?
you got that one.
Gazettier. Gazettieri. This is like the factions and societies, but it's the actual places themselves. So it goes through like area by area and will give you kind of like an alphabetical, like, okay, this region looks like this. You might find these kind of things at this place. The thing that I loved about it, I thought this was a really nice addition to it, was that they have like adventure hooks. Not in every one of the places, but in a lot of the main places, they'll have adventure hooks, and not just for low level, but mid and high too.
Yeah, so when you get to a certain point like that, when it comes to your adventures, like it's nice to have suggestions on that because making encounters at that level is very difficult to do. Your characters have access to things like wish and like meteor swarm.
Yeah, and it's good in both scenarios too, because it's like it makes the setting more approachable, I think, because you're looking at these places and you might say, okay, well, this area looks kind of nice, but like, what should I do there? And it's like, all right, well, here's a low level uh, hook. Why don't you just build that out a little bit? That'll get you started. That'll get you acquainted with the setting, and then just start doing your own thing from there. Or like you said, with the epic level stuff, maybe you have your campaign ready. You have all these cool things, and you do all of those things, and now you have these epic level characters, these high tier characters, and you're like, well, shoot, what do I do with them? Well, just look through the epic level hooks and see if any of them call out to you, and that should get you. It's not going to give you. Don't expect a full adventure out of these. That's later on, but it'll give you. It'll push you in the right direction just to get you started and spark your imagination, and I think that's huge. I think my complaint about this is, or my only complaint about it is that I think they should have random encounter tables in addition to this kind of thing. Like, I honestly, I I like the hooks, and that was the thing that I pointed out and said that like I'm glad they put it in there.
Sure,
Personally, I would rather have random encounter tables than hooks for every single place. And you could give me one for the Menagerie Coast,
sure.
one for like Isle Cross. Like, I just personally think that that is a very helpful thing to have in there, because I don't have to figure out what
Yeah,
exists in this place. You're telling me what I can encounter there. And for me, if I'm trying to build an encounter and I'm like, well, this place sounds cool, what lives there? And I see your random encounter table and it's like, oh, like a tribe of tabaxi, or like, like, or like a dragon or a lich, or like whatever. That I'm like, oh, okay, like these things live here.
yeah.
Let's work something around that.
I have to say, I think that's a very fair criticism. It's interesting because right before you said that, I was just thinking it's a nice balance of giving you a couple of ideas with the adventure hooks that can kind of encompass the spirit of the region and of the campaign setting. But I think if this is going to provide the service of really giving you what it's like to live in this region, there's no reason why encounter tables shouldn't or random encounter tables shouldn't be there. It doesn't have to be crazy. Just give me 12, there were 6 to 12 options, and there you go.
I'm glad that you said 12 too, because I totally agree with that too. Like, give me a D12, give me a 2D6 table, something like that. I don't need a D100 table. I don't want a D100 table. I'm just not interested in that. You don't have to go crazy. Just something small for every region. I think that would have been a huge boost, or huge plus. They'd
Yeah.
get 10 bonus points if they had that for me.
10 points.
And that's not like, I don't even think, I wouldn't say like it loses points for not having that. Like, I'm not, it's not really a complaint that it doesn't have it in there. Just something that I would like to see in the future for other campaign settings. All right, so then we have chapter 4, which is the character options. And the first section here is the races. And as far as the races go, they pretty much gave you anything that has ever been published for 5e. I think that's okay because for most of them, there's like okay, dwarves. Here's dwarves in general. Here's dwarves in the Menagerie Coast. Or here's what they do here. Here's the places that they live in. And I think that was a nice thing to add. So instead of it just being like, yeah, play whatever you want, it's like, play whatever you want, and here's how they fit into the world. Are there any updates to races that you thought were good in here?
Yes, the Dragonborn have dark vision. Real dragons have true sight. But we don't give that to Dragonborn. No. Thank you, Matt Mercer. This was something that should have been fixed in the original. Dark vision is not overpowered. Just give it to him. It's fine. Yeah, I think, they had a couple of reimaginations of elves and stuff, like, the palette elves, I thought was kind of cool. It was sort of like a moon elf. So there were his own little twist on a couple things here and there, but by and large, it is what you just said.
And they gave us like some subclasses. And you know me, like I like my martial classes, so Echo Knight, pretty freaking sweet. Everything kind of just revolves around the new magic that he added in here, which is Dunamancy, and that is what chronergy and graviturgy, and it's basically like time and space magic. And
Time, space, gravity.
yeah, there's some really neat stuff in there. I, honestly, just check those subclasses out because there's a lot to dive into for it, but
Mm-hmm.
they're pretty neat. Maybe we'll do a video on each of the subclasses. I don't know.
I think the most like bread and butter crowning thing here has got to be the heroic chronicle. I mean, we used that when we made our characters for Ancient Relics.
Yeah, that's it. Literally exactly what I was gonna say. Heroic Chronicle was one of those things that it feels like something that it's crazy that it took this long for it to be put, something like that to be put into a setting guide, a setting book, and there needs to be a Heroic Chronicle in every setting moving forward. It's one of those things. It's like now that this exists, now that the gods have battled here, the landscape has changed forever, and it can never be the same. Like,
Yeah, we fought this battle and won.
yeah,
Yeah, what the Heroic Chronicle really is it's just a way for players and dungeon masters to take a character concept that somebody wants to play. This could work for NPCs as well if you wanted to, DMs, and just tie them to Wildemount. So it was very interesting because I was fortunate enough to sit in each of the players making their characters for Ancient Relics and Hoki Religions, just to watch how, for the most part, people had like, I kind of want to play, like with Evbo, he'd be like, I wanted to play a monk, a halfling monk. That's kind of, I mean, I have some ideas on how it goes, and then all of a sudden it was just like, well, let's just use the Heroic Chronicle. And all of a sudden he comes up with Echo, and it's like this rich backstory.
yeah.
On
Michael.
a side note, yeah, I was gonna say Michael with Mac. It's not really possible for at the making of this video for viewers to really understand just how well he is playing his character with such subtle fidgetings of things or some questions that might seem like he's asking out of the blue. The sequence of roles that he had to come up with this story, it's the kind of backstory that you're like, yeah, you're just telling tall tales, man. Like, there's no way that happened to you.
It honestly is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen come out of random dice rolls, because it was the same thing where he was like, I think this is what my character is going to be like. Now let me roll what their story actually is. And he rolled like crazy things, but all of them fit together somehow and made just this really, really like just deep character
Oh yeah.
with so much complexity to him. And that's just, I mean, you're just gonna have to keep watching because all that'll get drawn out at some point. But for now, it's just the little things here and there, like Jake said, that he is doing a fantastic job at portraying and role playing. And once if people are paying attention, like down the road, when you learn more about his character, you're gonna you're gonna have like one of those boards with the pins and the yarn. And you're gonna be
Yes.
like, this is why this. Whoa, you know?
Yeah, there's a part of it that I feel as though in order for some people to catch on, they're going to actually have to go back and watch. Like I should just like mark off like, oh, he did this, he said that, just to try and really capture how cool it is. Like even if we could just make like a sequence video, like look at all these things he was doing and you didn't know. But yeah, again, a lot of those characters are a product of the Heroic Chronicle, and I know I've said something like this before. Like if you can tie a character to the setting, that's going to tie the player to the game that much more. And I know all of us that are in this game are crazy tied to this game. Like we love our characters, and they're pretty much all products of the Heroic Chronicle. So,
Yeah, then the other thing that they have in here is just a couple backgrounds, and the backgrounds are, typical backgrounds. I don't think there's anything really groundbreaking or anything negative or positive with them. It's just kind of like, yeah, a couple backgrounds. That's cool. I think they could have put a couple more backgrounds there. Like, you definitely could have had a Dwendalian Empire themed background. That they're like, I don't know. There's. I remember when I first looked at it, I was a little underwhelmed with just that there were only two backgrounds, but there's so many different factions in the world. But realistically, you don't need a background for every faction. They have the adapting backgrounds section, and you could easily just take Soldier and drop that into Soldier in the Dwendalian Empire, or
yeah, I agree.
Criminal and drop that into Tribes of Shady Creek Run, or whatever. Next, we have Chapter 5, Adventures in Wildemount. And that's exactly what it sounds like. He gives you 3 or 4, actually, pre-written adventures.
Mm-hmm.
None of them are super long, just something to get you started in the world. And they all take place in different regions in Wildemount. So it's kind of nice that almost wherever you're interested in, you could take one of those adventures and get a start there. And it might not be in the specific area that you're interested in, but it'll be in the broad region. And Wildemount's a very big continent. So if you start off in one area, you could easily just work your way down to the specific spot that you were interested in, and you'll have that background information from the adventures. And I do think it's really nice that they put those in there. I don't know of any other setting guide that has 4 adventures in there. I mean, you're lucky usually to get one.
Some of my favorites, I think actually Wizards of the Coast did with some Star Wars Saga edition. Some of the later books had multiple adventures, and usually one was like a big one, you know. But I don't see why you wouldn't want to have those tools to be able to kind of tell those kinds of stories. And this is a great way to get started. Maybe something really funny happens, and you're like, this would be great to include in a future thing, or maybe some kind of event is set in motion. And so, yeah, I haven't read through these adventures because I know you and I are always like, are you gonna run it? Am I gonna run it? Like, how's this gonna go? um, but I think
First.
exactly. Yeah, I feel like this is one of those things where anything that can help kickstart your adventure is going to be a really helpful tool.
It goes back into some similar themes that we've seen from other options that they've added here, and it's just all going back to that point of making this setting more approachable. You're giving someone an in where maybe they've never DM'd before. Maybe all they've done is watched Critical Role. Okay, well, now they could buy a player's handbook, a DMG, and a monster manual, and Wildemount, or they could use the basic rules in Wildemount. And that would be enough for them to just take the basic rules and one of those adventures, and they could just run that. And that could be their first experience with the game. And it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it because they have the tools in their hands. This brings us to chapter 6, Wildemount Treasures. Most of this is kind of run of the mill. You got magic items in Wildemount. They're tied to Wildemount, so they have some Wildemount things, Wildemount themes, and it's magic items. Aside from that, you have vestiges of the Divergence or of Divergence. And if you've watched any of Critical Role, Campaign 1 or 2, I don't know if actually Campaign 2, I'm not caught up, but Campaign 1, this becomes a important thing in it. And there's some cool items in there, some Arms of the Betrayers. Those are pretty cool too. And if you've been paying attention from before, Betrayers, oh, that sounds familiar. Maybe the story of Wildemount. I don't know. Anything cool about those? Anything that stood out to you for these?
I
Anything
just like
different?
that the vestiges have like 3 states. I think that's a fun storytelling device. You know, it has like a dormant state, an awakened state, and an exalted state. So like the magic item can get more powerful as either as you level or as you go through certain storytelling elements, however you and your DM want to, or how, you know, want to work through that.
Yeah, I think it's nice to have anything that like levels with you. Like if you could start the story with your father's magic sword or whoever's magic sword or something, and when you're level 3, it's it's a nice weapon. But then when you level up to level 7, it's still a good weapon. I like stuff like that. So vestiges are pretty cool. Like even just the concept of them is nice to have in your game.
I think Theros actually built on this. I tend to like the simplicity of the way this is a little better. I like when things are simple, but yet add depth. I don't like necessarily when things are so crazy, like you have to have a piety score of 50 in order to get to certain something. I think it works for Theros, but I think you and I might differ a little bit there too. But
I like the currency, but
yeah,
I totally understand not wanting that and that being too much.
yeah.
Simplicity is definitely nice to have in some situations, especially when you have it complicated the rest of the game. You know,
I think what's neat about this is this emphasizes more of a storytelling element, which clearly is what Critical Role is all about. So it's kind of nice. I think it's nice that this system reflects what they do, and then Theros offers an alternative to that because Critical Role is not the only way to do this. There's more than one way. In fact, there's like a million, and they're all valid. This is just happens to be one of those awesome ones.
that's like your opinion, man. The final, like, real chapter of the book would be chapter 7, the Wildemount Bestiary. It's like a mini monster map. Um, Personally, this is the most disappointing part of the book for me. And it's not that I think they did a bad job with it. The fact that they put any sort of monster manual in here puts them like leaps and bounds beyond pretty much any other campaign setting for 5e. I guess for me personally, watching all the videos leading up to it, I think they overhyped the monster manual in here because like a lot of the options that you have are things like Frost Giant Zombie, which is just a frost giant reskinned as a zombie, or like Frost Worm, which is like a purple worm but cold. And it's like I don't know. For me, I think the rest of the book is very good, but this
Mm.
part for me was kind of like, why even add it in here?
I think it's a very fair criticism, and I do feel like that was very much hyped. I'm trying to turn back the clock, and as you get older, sometimes the memory's not so good. But I think when you said that, I was like, yeah, I do feel like they hyped that up a bit, didn't they? Two things I'd like to say. Number one, it's never bad to have more options to throw at your players, especially veteran players, that it's like, oh, there's gelatinous cube. It's like everything is really clean, huh? Okay. Like there's no dust on the dungeon. This is really ancient. Okay. Would my character know anything about this? You know, like they go through all the things trying not to metagame. So like I having new things to throw at your players is never a bad thing. But there's probably maybe 12 to 15 options maybe listed here. Um, and I think the most important one that's listed though is an actual mount, a wild mount, the Moorbounders. So there you go. It's the
Perfect.
Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, and clearly they must have been talking about the Moorbounders.
I
So
knew that this video was about mounts. I knew it.
that's really what it was about all along.
I guess I just would have liked to see more bounders, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And I barely know her.
Okay.
Last thing we have in here is it's not really a chapter, it's just the maps. And the maps are excellent all throughout this. I totally forget the name of their cartographer,
Devon
but
Rue.
Devon Rue. Yeah, Devon Rue is just fantastic. If you look at the map of the continent, it's phenomenal. Like really, really, really good. Like even if you're not interested in this at all, just Google continent of Wildemount and look at the map because she did a fantastic job on it. Yeah, no, this one is definitely nice to have on D&D Beyond because it's been nice to just kind of be able to pop through it on my phone and when I pull up the maps, I could save those maps and they're high quality pictures to zoom in and it still look good. So I
Mm-hmm.
definitely liked having this on D&D Beyond.
They also got some city maps and a few like dungeon or cave, like layers, different like adventuring spots, which is good, especially if you're doing online play. 2020, that's kind of important these days.
Aside from all the maps and all the specific things, let's take a broad scope. I think they did a lot of cool things in here. Do you have any thoughts on the book as a whole? What's your
Sure.
take?
I think campaign settings as a whole, up until Wildemount came out, just were overall kind of lacking in some ways, and some very basic ways. This book offers depth in culture, history, the gazetteer. Like, I feel as though reading this, you can take it in bite-sized nuggets a lot easier than you can in other campaign settings.
Sword Sword Coast Adventures guide.
That's
We'll just call it what it is.
it's just awful. For the Forgotten Realms is the flagship campaign setting for them, and you're only telling us about the Sword Coast. That's a
And
big old fail, if you ask
poorly
me.
at that. No disrespect. I know people worked hard on that, but like when you compare that to this or Theros, if all those books are going for $30, I am urging you to get either Wildemount or Theros.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. And they're just some
Um,
very basic tools, like the Heroic Chronicle. Like now that it's here, like why did it take this long to do this? I don't know, but I just feel as if when I read The Explorer's Guide to Wildemount or Mythic Odysseys of Theros, I instantly want to play and or run a game in these settings. The Sword Coast, I read that and I go, I hope I never have to play a game here because it's just really overwhelming. Here, I feel like I can get connected, and there, I feel like there's just there's like charts and charts and charts of gods by race, and it's just very overwhelming. That being said, I think that this gets an A for me in comparison to its predecessors, but I still feel as though there is room for improvement. So maybe an A minus. I don't know. It's still compared to what had happened or what had come out up until then, hands down the best one. Theros came out after that, and I think Theros may have pushed the envelope even another step forward. So yeah, they're getting better.
yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, you've heard me talk about it before. I get frustrated every time they announce a new campaign setting.
Just
Uh,
remembering text messages. Ugh, it's another campaign setting. Like that's the way I read it. Like when
Written too.
yeah.
Like, but that's because like I'm really excited and we'll be talking about this in the future, but I'm excited for things like Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. That those are the kind of things that I look forward to as a consumer of D&D products. That being said, when I bought this campaign setting, I was very pleasantly surprised because I was expecting I was expecting it to be like its predecessors, we'll say. Here's another place to adventure in, go do your thing. And what we got was something with so much depth to it, and it had so much to offer, so much more to offer than I expected of it. It's a well thought out setting, interesting enough that I wanted to run Ancient Relics and Hoki Religions there instead of anywhere else. I made the decision to run a campaign in that setting, so that should tell you something right there. um,
I'm wondering, and this is just kind of spitballing here. I think the Forgotten Realms has so much like already written history to it that when you do make a campaign setting for something like that, it probably is going to feel kind of big and clunky, especially for someone who normally runs homebrew games in their own settings and they're just like, ooh, I really want to run into this. Like, this is a lot. Whereas Wildemount has that sweet spot for me of give me like 5 really cool historical events and like a bunch of factions in some places, and then just let my imagination run wild with it. Because it's almost like the difference between like a really intense preset adventure versus a homebrew in a way. Because you're just like, I can't tell a story, and I mean, you can, but it's like it's my Forgotten Realms instead.
no, I was gonna say exactly what you just said, and comparing it when I play a game in the Forgotten Realms, I feel the same way that I feel when I run a pre-written campaign. And if you've ever heard me talk about this before, know that I have a hard time running pre-written campaigns because I personally feel trapped in a box when I try to run things like that. And I'm
DM
gonna try to.
claustrophobia.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Like I'm afraid that like I'm gonna make some judgment call on the spot because of something that the players did, and that's gonna somehow screw something up because I don't know everything there is to know about the setting, and there's so much history with it that it's just like the only way you could know it is if you started playing when it was released and like you followed it and you read all the what's his name, R.A. Salvatore books, like, and you know, I've read some of those, but like all of that to say, really enjoyed this book. It brings a lot to the table. I have no problem recommending this. You've heard me sing its praises throughout this whole video. The downsides, I would say, are maybe it could have used a couple more backgrounds. Monster manual that it included wasn't exactly inspired or inspiring. And then I'll have like a minor nitpick would be like some of the art is it doesn't follow like one style throughout the whole thing, but that's also something that I wanted to mention specifically because they used people from, as far as I might know, they used people from their community to put art in the books, people that have been doing fan art for years for Critical Role. And
That's just
that takes
awesome.
it, exactly,
Yeah.
that takes it from being like the thing where I'm like, oh well, like some of these art styles kind of feel like mismatched, and it takes it from that feeling to, oh wow, that's so cool that all these people who stuck with them from the beginning, they're like, hey, here's this reward, we want you to put this to draw this for our book or to paint this for a book or whatever. And I think that's awesome.
Couldn't agree more.
So if you're an explorer out there running around with your explorers pack, maybe you should include a pocket guide to Wildemount in there. I don't know. I guess I was just kind of disappointed with chapter 6 with the Wildemount treasures because it's like
Hmm.
there's some magic items and that's fine, I guess, and like some vestiges,
Yeah.
convergence. It's like whatever. I'm really excited about the betrayer thing, but it's just the arms of the betrayer. And it's like, what am I supposed to do with that? There's only two of them, and like I'm the jerk that gets stuck with the left arm of the betrayer, and it's like, what?
Yeah,
I don't
man.
know. It's just like,
That's that's not right.